There's the Challenger that somehow keeps evading the videos. But anyways, let's go over everything that's wrong with this $800 Eclipse I just picked up. So I'll try to make this as quick as possible, although there is quite a lengthy list of things that this car needs. So there was a reason it was only 800 bucks. Man, I'm waiting. Yep. There he goes. I was going to say, man, I'm waiting for him to squawk real quick before I talk. He won't shut up. Anyways, you might be asking yourself, or me rather for that instance, why the heck would I take on something like this when it needs so many things? But it's because I got into it so cheap. I mean, yep. Thanks again. I mean, even today, current moment, a car like this car is still about around a $4,000 car once it's all fixed up. So 800 bucks ain't too bad. Yeah, it's a lot of work, but I'll be doing it all myself. So even once everything's all said and done, I'll probably still be in under $2,000. So it's still like 50% off of what it would have been if everything was good to go on it. But anyways, when I went to test drive this thing before deciding if I was going to buy it or not, you know, for the price $800, and I was informed that it needed one or two things, which I figured there was going to be way more than that, which there is. So I was expecting, you know, to find quite a few issues. So I'm going to kind of go like follow a storyline here. Again, I'll try to make it quick, but I'll go over everything I found during the test drive and then everything I've found since. So I was told up front something about the suspension and then also an exhaust leak. And that was all I was told. That's all that was admitted to be wrong with the car, but there's definitely way more than that. So she does have a big exhaust leak right under the engine. There's a little flex section there that's got a hole big enough for me to put my finger through it, so it's pretty much straight piped after one of the cats right under the engine there. And then the suspension issue, the guy didn't really know what was wrong, but I am saying it's completely blown struts. I don't know how well I can show this, but if that turkey would shut up, you could hear the squishing and squeaking sounds. So you can hear the front struts going quick, quick, quick. And also, I don't know how well I can show it here, but yeah, when I was working on it the other day and further inspections and whatnot, you can see there's like fluid leaking out of both struts, so they're both done for. The front end, it's basically just riding on the springs right now, like the whole car. The squeaking was coming from the rear, so at a minimum the front struts are completely blown out on both sides and need replaced. This thing drives like a boat going down the road. Every little divot and bump and whatnot, it just causes it to float all over the place. It's kind of scary, to be honest. So those were the two issues made known to me by the owner. I'm assuming because he knew that generally everybody would pick up on something being wrong with the handling of the vehicle, and then also you can obviously hear the exhaust leaks. So, and then also during the test drive, not only did I notice that yes, in fact, the struts were completely gone because it was driving like it was on water, literally swaying back and forth over the smallest imperfections on the road. But I also noticed like some, you know, just random noises and just basically feeling like some other things in the suspension weren't all that great. So I was suspecting like, you know, ball joints and bushings and things like that. Oh, I forgot there was one other thing he mentioned that the car needed, which he was wrong, and I'll get to that later. The power steering pump, because the thing screeched like crazy every time you would turn the steering wheel, and then like it was super heavy steering. It would come in and out. Sometimes the wheel was like jerking back and forth when you would try to turn, and his statement was because it was doing that, that's why he knew it was the power steering pump. But that belt was freaking gone. I'll have a replacement video on that coming up, but claimed it needed power steering, and thankfully I got lucky and it was just a belt. The engine runs fantastic. I'm trying to figure out if there's something going on with this second gear synchro. So I noticed when I backed out of his driveway and took it down the road, which by the way, he had the car running and fully warmed up when I got there. That's usually a red flag, or I shouldn't even say usually, it is a red flag. So as soon as I seen that, I'm like, okay, what's this guy trying to hide? Now, if you know anything about manual transmissions, usually the synchros get better as the car warms up. Although with the car just sitting there, that's not going to warm the transmission up. The transmission doesn't warm up until you actually start driving down the road and getting all the gears in it moving and whatnot. But anyways, I started going down the road, and even with the clutch fully depressed, I shifted into second, and I got a little grind going into second. So I was like, oh, okay, so the second gear synchro isn't that good. However, the rest of the drive, I didn't have any other issues, so I figured, okay, well, the tranny warmed up, so it's fine now. So, but that second gear synchro is definitely worn at least a little bit. However, oddly, I noticed during driving it that if I shift it fast, it went in no problem. So I guess it's only going to give me an issue when it's cold. I have no clue what kind of fluid's in there or how much, so I'm hoping that with a fluid change that'll help improve that some. But again, the engine is fantastic. It sounds super smooth. It ran really great, except for one issue I had. I'll get to that. I've driven a lot of cars, test driven, I should say, Eclipses with this motor, the Stratus, the Avenger, and whatnot. A lot of times they have a ticking sound. I would actually say more than half of them I drove, they have like a lifter ticking sound, and this one purrs super smooth, so that's good. 138,000 miles, so pretty low miles for an 03. I mean, this thing's 20 years old now, so... but I noticed with the hood pop when I was looking around for things, you know, checking everything out, that I was getting a very faint smell of coolant. So I picked up on the fact that it had a coolant leak, although I had no idea how bad it was going to be. I do kind of believe either this guy was completely ignorant when it comes to cars, or he was intentionally hiding it, is what I'm going with. It has a massive leak. I'll go over that, but it wasn't leaking on the test drive, and is because it was so low on coolant that it wasn't reaching the area to where it's leaking, which is up top here. The water pump's right down in here up top, and there's a line that runs through there. I'm not quite sure where it's coming from yet. That's be another video. I'm going to tear this thing apart and get that leak fixed. But during the test drive, there was no leak because it didn't have enough coolant in it. So either he had the level just right that day, or it was cold enough out that the car didn't try to overheat. But the first time I drove this thing after I got it home, it was trying to overheat on me. So upon investigation, I found out that the radiator was pretty empty. There was nothing left in there. Once I got it topped off on coolant, I didn't have any more overheating issues, and I got my heat back, by the way, because I had no heat. And that was kind of funny because I asked him, I forgot to test it out on the test drive whether or not the heater worked, so I just asked him, hey, by the way, does the heater work? I forgot to try it out while I was out driving around. He said, oh yeah, it works. And then of course the first time I drove the car after I got it home, I went to turn on the heater and no heat. But that was why, because it was missing at least a gallon of coolant out of the cooling system. So once I got the cooling system topped back up, that's when I found the massive leak, once the level was high enough. So much so that even at idle, it's just sitting here, steam's coming out from under the hood. And like I said, there was none of that on the test drive, and I think that was intentional. So yeah, there's like a lake of coolant down here under the intake manifold where that leak is coming from, something up in there. There's just a whole lake of freaking coolant up in there. I'm getting a drip per second at idle. So you can imagine that actually driving it down the road, having the revs higher and whatnot, it's probably losing a gallon an hour, I would estimate it at. So pretty significant coolant leak I got to get fixed there. But like I said, it was convenient that that was not able to be found on the test drive. There was no steam coming out from under the hood like it does now that it's filled up, and no overheating issues or anything like that. It's like the level was just right to keep it from overheating and then also keep it from having steam coming out from under the engine bay, so I couldn't detect that. This front wheel here doesn't match the rest. I recognize that right away, and the front tires are bald. The rear are okay, but the fronts are bald and need replaced like ASAP. One of the brake rotors or pad is squealing every time I hit the brake. I'm pretty sure it's the wear indicator hitting the rotor, so we need brakes too. There's a bunch of the typical little imperfections, like some of the clear coat's coming off. This thing's filthy too. It was funny because it was rather dirty when I went to look at it. The guy didn't even bother washing it or nothing. You got some little chips that, oh, that's not, that's stuff off the tree. There's some of the clear coat that's like coming off. You got, you know, little scratches and dents here and there. There's some rock chips on the hood I need to address. It's not too bad yet, so I want to get that fixed before it really starts rusting out. So there's a few of those on the hood. You know, some of the lines on the body are off here and there, but it's actually pretty decently straight. I mean, overall it's a pretty decent looking car. I mean, so that's about it. Upon initial inspection, I have found a a few more things, as I said. So initially, you know, I was informed, hey, it's got this exhaust leak and here's where it is. Hey, there's something up with the suspension and there's also a power steering issue. That's all he told me. And then, like I said, I was sniffing around under the hood. I picked up on the fact that there was at least a coolant leak of some sort. Noticed upon driving it that the second gear synchro isn't the greatest. And then while on the test drive, aside for the thing like being a handful, just trying to keep it on the road because of all the worn out suspension components, I opened it up a few times and I was like running it out through the top gear of third, and then all of a sudden the car basically started running like crap, sounded way different. I had a power loss and I was like, oh, okay, I'm getting a massive misfire right now. So I let up and stepped out of it and then got back into it, and then it was perfectly fine, went away. I was able to replicate that a couple times, so I noticed that there was like a massive misfire on my test drive. Oh, it's funny because when I got back, I asked him about that. I was like, hey, and the check engine light came on too. It was out when I first started driving, and as soon as that happened, the check engine light immediately came on. I was kind of mad at myself because I forgot to bring my Modus scanner. I had intended to, but somehow forgot and left it behind, so I wasn't able to scan it myself. But I asked him, I was like, hey, you ever get a misfire in this thing? I kind of explained what happened and whatnot. And, I was kind of gauging his response because I figured he'd try to explain his way out of it. And that's kind of what he did. He's like, oh yeah, it does that when it's cold. But once it warms up, it stops doing it. And I was like, dude, you already had the car running when I got here. We bullshitted for several minutes. Then I went down the road. The car was fully warmed up at that point already. And I was like, plus I've been out driving this for 20 minutes and it was on the way back that it started doing it. So, it's not from the car being cold. So that right there was complete BS. But anyways, after the test drive, I decided to still purchase it. I knew, I even told him then, I was like, oh, well, I think these struts are blown out, man. I think that's what's going on there. Again, like I said, I kind of gathered that it probably needed ball joints and different things, bushings and whatnot as well. The exhaust leak was apparent. The power steering issue was apparent. Second gear synchro, not the best. And then I knew I had a misfire issue I had to fix as well. And then also, like I said, I could smell coolant under the hood, so I knew there was something going on there. But the thing ran and drove pretty good, so I knew it was a bunch of little things here and there, so I agreed to go ahead and purchase it at that point. So then, like I said, once I actually got it here and took it for a drive and it tried to overheat on me, that's when I discovered that the coolant was low because of a massive leak, so I found that. Of course, I noticed the brakes squeaking on the test drive and the front tires being bald, so there's that as well. But then the other day, I went and I replaced the power steering belt, which fixed the power steering issue. Thankfully, I also replaced the serpentine belt while I was in there. Like I said, I'll have a video on that coming up here soon. But while I was doing that, I discovered on that side that the sway bar link was busted, so there's that. I found that since and need to address that. And then I also discovered some issues with the tires while doing that. I noticed on this one specifically, after I got it home, that it's got I just figured they were old. It's got a bunch of this cracking crap. I'm like, oh, they're old and dry rotted. But then I was like, wait a minute, there's not really much of that on the side wheel. I mean, there's some, but I thought it was peculiar that specifically the edge of the tread was cracking like that. But yeah, you can see all these cracks. So then I was like, well, I wonder if this thing's overinflated. And I pushed down on it real hard and it was like hard as a rock. And I was like, ooh, maybe it is. But then I was like, well, they are low pros, so, the sidewall's stiffer on them or whatnot. So I did eventually end up bringing a pressure gauge out here and checking. I'll have some B-roll footage of that. 90? The needle goes way past 60 there. But yeah, this thing had 90 PSI in it. So I let out all the excess air, obviously. Then I went over to that side. That one had too much in it. It was at 40 something. Then I came around to the rears, and I don't know if we can see it where the car's sitting now. This one was low, only had 19 pounds in it, but it's because I found a nail in the edge of the tire here. I think, yeah, right there it is. So I was like, all right, well, that's why that one's low, because it's slowly leaking. And then I came around to this tire, which was overpressured by a few pounds, and I found a nail in that one. And then when I let out the excess air on this one, it smelled sweet, so I know that there's like some stop leak in there. So yeah, there's that too. Oh, almost forgot. Also, the rear valve cover gasket is leaking like crazy, and oil's dripping down on the manifold. So I got a coolant leak, and I also got an oil leak there. But when I take this top end off here to address that coolant leak, I'm going to go ahead and do the valve cover gaskets as well, and get that taken care of. So since I've gotten it home, I found the oil leak, I found the massive coolant leak, I found out the tire pressures were all over the place, and this one was about to blow up because it had 90 psi in it. I found the 2 nails in the rear tires, and then that busted sway bar link on that side. So I think that's all the extra stuff I found since getting it home, and I've only driven this thing like 2 or 3 times now because that steering was so bad, and the screeching, and then not having power steering. I wanted to get that addressed right away before taking this thing anywhere. And then almost immediately I discovered on that first drive after I got it home that it's just spewing coolant, so I don't really want to drive it around like that either. So that is everything wrong with my $800 Eclipse that I know of so far. As I said, I already replaced the serpentine and power steering belt, so we got the power steering issue fixed. I'll have a video on that coming up soon, like I said. I'll also have a video coming up getting that coolant leak addressed, doing at least the front struts, so I can finally rip on this thing, because you get wheel hop like crazy in first and second gear and going over bumps because those struts are completely gone. So after I get those immediately pressing matters resolved there, then we can finally start working on some performance modifications and doing some runs in this thing. So that'll do it for this one. Check out my other channel if you're into firearms at all. It's currently Guns and Cars. I'm probably changing that name now that I started this car channel, but I'll have a link in the description for that other channel if you'd like to go check that out. Rooster says check it out. God, he's annoying. But thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you on the next one where we start tearing into this thing some.